So maybe so much attention has been placed on, understandably, the condition inside of the hospitals in Gaza, but can you paint a picture and speak to the broader humanitarian crisis on the ground in Gaza, what it's like for Gazans, day-to-day life for Gazans that don't have reliable access to the most basic necessities, food, shelter, water?
Yeah, absolutely. In my second medical mission in December of 2024, I actually went through the encampments outside of the hospital. I walked around on my own many times just to see what it was like, because I was seeing mostly patients inside the hospital. But the conditions are deplorable conditions. You have absolutely no sewage system. There's actually, a stream of water, which I found out was sewage coming right into the center of the road. And children were playing in it. I have photos of children playing in sewage, drinking water out of the ground pipes that is hypersalinated, contaminated with E. coli, and there's no filtration system, right? The chlorine and the membranes that are needed to clean the water that previously were available, all of that is blocked by Israel. And then there's fuel that's needed for the generators that filter water outside homes. And those are also they're not functioning because there's no fuel. So I went into some of these tents and there's one toilet, if you want to call that a toilet. It's mostly like a hole that's been created and made by people out of desperation. But it's essentially being shared by hundreds of people. There's flies everywhere. Now, you see rats. You're seeing that in social media. I'm also hearing it from people that I talk to. There are rats biting babies in their sleep. So these are just unnecessary and preventable conditions. That's the biggest part about all of this, is it's manufactured, and it's not limited to the hospital, just like you said.
And as a physician, what was it like to save a child's life in such horrible conditions inside of the hospital, only to have them possibly die from E. coli or hypothermia?
Yeah, it's a terrible feeling to know that that's the possibility, but there are many children I think of every day that miraculously survived, but currently they're still facing infection. They're facing repeated infection because of those conditions that I talked about. Things that are like physical therapy. I remember a child I treated there named Sammy, who had completely the lower jaw blown off of his face. He had to have reconstructive surgery, essentially, but the scar tissue that he was left with, you need intense physical therapy to kind of help with the movement of the mouth and the face to be able to eat and talk. And every time he would move, he would have so much pain that he would be crying all the time. And with the lack of pain medication, he was not even able to drink through a straw at times. And you talk about shakes and things that you can give to pediatric patients to replace their meals, but that was unavailable. So then, this feeling of, okay, this child is now going to starve to death because they don't have the aftercare, the post-operative care that they need. And it just everything feels futile. You can take heroic measures, but it's useless if you don't have the aftercare. There's so much more needed. Amputations are a good example. So the highest number of child amputees in Gaza. But after you get an amputation, and if you were lucky enough to survive that surgery and get a prosthetic limb by some miracle, you still have to have even ground to walk on. You still have to have access to different things in order to recover. But just imagine you have a prosthetic limb, no physical therapy, but now you have to crawl and climb through rubble to get to your home or your dwelling. It's very difficult. It's hard enough in a society that everything's functioning like the US or somewhere in Europe, but just imagine that in a place like Gaza. It's near impossible.
Yeah, it's so deliberate and so diabolical. International organizations, including the United Nations and major humanitarian groups, have documented the extensive damage to Gaza's healthcare infrastructure during this genocide. From your firsthand experience, what did this destruction or degradation of all these hospitals mean for the patients and for the medical staff on the ground?
I mean, it's not just limited to Gaza, because once you set this precedence that there is no safe zone or safe space and nobody is immune, nobody is protected under any international law, you create a precedent that's actually very dangerous. When you are bombing healthcare workers, journalists, children, families, and homes, all of these classes, disabled people, when you're doing that, you are saying that basically there is no international law that we must abide by, and that nobody is protected. But, to your question about the healthcare system there, just having a minor illness, for example, if you have a minor illness here, you go to the doctor, you get the medications that you need, you come home, you recover. If you are ill in any sense of the word in Gaza, it is a death sentence. Treatable conditions, like even cancer care in Gaza is pretty much non-existent. The entire hospitals that were helping patients with cancer, those have been destroyed by the Israeli military. Chemo is near impossible to come by unless it's brought in by an NGO or by a healthcare worker. It's difficult to obtain that. But I remember a 29-year-old mom who came in when I was at Al-Aqsa, and she wasn't a part of a mass casualty incident. She came in with 3 little children, all under the age of 7. They came in an ambulance with her during a mass casualty incident, but she was not a victim of mass casualty incident. She had a diaper on her breast, and it was drenched in blood. And she was passing out over and over again. She was awake, she would talk, she would pass out, but she was very pale. And she had a tumor that had grown so significantly and vascularized, because it was a cancerous tumor, that she was hemorrhaging from this tumor. And I looked at her records, I talked to her family, and it turned out that this tumor was the size of like an olive just several months before, and it could have been removed. Like in a normal functioning, even before 2023, it could have been removed. She could have gotten chemo or whatever she needed at that time, which would have been curable. But there was nothing available after 2023 when she did get diagnosed with this. And there was nothing we could do. I watched her and I knew she was going to die, and very shortly after leaving the department, but I gave her 2 units of blood just to keep her alive enough so she can say goodbye to her children. And I'll never forget it. It's just a 29-year-old mom who deserved the health care just like anyone else in the world, and who was denied.
And how do you cope with the reality of having to decide who receives potentially life-saving treatment when resources are completely exhausted?
Yeah, it's a position that no one should be put in, right? It's one thing if you have all the resources and because of the conditions of the patient that's brought in, that they can't survive their injuries, but this is different. This is not the same thing. These are things that are denied to people that's just not necessary. Choosing, the whole concept of choosing. I was just there for a temporary amount of time. I can't even begin to imagine how much of a toll it takes for the people the healthcare workers in Gaza that are doing this day in and day out, and much of them trainees. They're making decisions that even seasoned attendings with years of experience in the US, they don't make. They make it with like an ethics committee, these decisions. And they're making them single-handedly because they have no choice. But yeah, it absolutely weighs on you. Mira is a great example of a little girl that you just take a chance. Like miraculously, she survived. How many other kids were there that could have been, saved or just anything? You rack your brain about it all the time. There were so many kids, but unfortunately, you're left with no choice, because if you do intubate somebody, for example, take their airway, take them to a CT scan, you're using the resources from someone else that maybe has a better chance of survival. And putting someone on a ventilator is, it's a big deal in Gaza, because you can also get infections. You can get ventilator-associated pneumonia, which is resistant, and there's no antibiotics. So making that decision is is a grave decision. It's not like a light, in the US, if I thought to intubate someone, I can do it in seconds, no worries. But in Gaza, it's a very different decision and outcome.
You are an emergency medical physician. You're used to dealing with trauma. But in Gaza, it was so different for you. You told me that you were dealing with mass casualty events multiple times a day, day after day. How did that affect your emotional well-being and that of the other healthcare workers on the ground in Gaza?
Yeah, I think when you go to Gaza, I had seen many of the images coming out. I had spoken to some people that had been there, but I didn't quite grasp how terrible it was until I was there. And it's a hard pill to swallow as a physician, especially as an emergency physician that does this. We take care of people at the end of their life. We try to prevent them from dying, or whatever we can do. And to know that you can barely make a dent because the casualties are so many, and you have absolutely no resources, and many of them are children. It's an unimaginable feeling. And you have to reorganize how you are going to show up for these people. And it's not always saving a life, unfortunately. It's showing solidarity for the people that are there, for the healthcare workers that are there, but also documenting. I think documenting and preserving the things that you're witnessing is probably about the most important thing that any of us can do.
You talked about the resilience and the work ethic of the Palestinian doctors. Talk to me about the risks. What risks do Palestinian doctors, nurses, paramedics, and support staff simply face just for showing up to work every single day in the face of exhaustion, displacement, personal loss?
Yeah, I actually spoke to many of the nurses that were arrested, that were detained and abducted by the Israeli soldiers when Nasser was under siege in 2023, simply because they were present in the hospital during October 7th. Not because of anything else. The fact that they were in the hospital that day, they were arrested, they were abducted, they were tortured for months in prison. Before they were let go, without any charges, of course. But they came right back to work. I mean, not like, they took a month or two off. They came right back to work within a day or two of getting back, of getting out of prison. And I know each and every healthcare worker there, at that time that I was there, no one was getting paid. And if they were getting paid, then it was just very little pay. But most of them were volunteering. Knowing that they have a target on their back. And when I asked some of them, what's making you come back? It's incredibly scary here to be a healthcare worker. And we took an oath. That's what we're here for. We're here to serve our people. We're here to see patients. So why would we abandon that now when they need us the most? That makes no sense. That's not why we went to school. That's not why we got trained. So they just uphold this standard that I've never witnessed in my life. And it really, ironically, teaches us how to be healthcare workers, how to be physicians, because they take it to heart, and as you should.
They're willing to die for their patients.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which makes me think of Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, who actually was abducted December 27, 2024, when you were that was your second medical mission in Gaza. Did you ever speak to Dr. Abu Safia?
No, I never spoke to him, but I remember the day. I was doing quite a few news interviews. It was towards the end of my mission, and he was abducted that day. And I remember hearing about it. And we were supposed to absorb many of the patients coming from Kamal Adwan Hospital to Alexa, because they were still attached to IVs. They were still attached to machines and ventilators. And that's why he got abducted, is because he refused to abandon the patients there. But I just remember thinking, why is a pediatrician being arrested and walking to a tank? while an Israeli soldier is pointing a gun at him. I just couldn't understand what was happening. And to this day, he's held without charges. He has lost so much weight, has not been receiving the medical care that he is needing. And still, there's no reason for it.
You know, you spoke about the complete dismantling of international law right in front of our face. Hospitals are supposed to be protected spaces. And speaking of protected spaces and safe zones, the Israeli authorities designated certain areas as safe zones for displaced civilians. Can you speak on that? You spent time in Gaza. Were there safe zones?
There's no such thing as a safe zone in Gaza. The majority of our patients, when I was there both times, they were coming from designated safe zones. So that means that missiles were fired, bunker bombs were dropped in safe zones. To say that it's a safe zone, that's just not true. It's simply not true because, almost every patient I saw, they were coming from safe zones. And Gaza Strip is incredibly small, okay? So this is just like common sense. If you drop a bunker bomb on a small radius of land, it's going to affect a very large area, right? That's what bunker bombs do. That's their purpose. You're not supposed to be dropping them on tents. But if you do, like they do in Gaza, the Israeli soldiers, that's what they do, you're going to kill a very large population. You're going to kill casualties, dismember them, all of the atrocious things that we've been seeing. And that's just common sense, it's logic. So that happened day in and day out. So of course, as you can imagine, the casualties that we were getting, they were family members. They were children, mothers, brothers, fathers coming in. There was a day when I was at Nasser Hospital, and we were at the balcony, Dr. Helen and I, who I have a close relationship with. We were overlooking these children playing with kites near the hospital. And a missile, actually, we went down and we heard a huge airstrike. Everything was moving. And this was around the hospital. It was so close that the ground was shaking. The doors were moving. And we had dozens and dozens of children come in with these small wounds made by tungsten shrapnel. And most of them were dead. And they're cluster bombs, essentially. But those are the type of injuries that we saw. And they were in zones that were, of course, designated as safe. That patients are told, or people were told to evacuate to, and then they would vomit.
Speaking of injuries, in the documentary Kids Under Fire, you provide firsthand testimony and documentation to the injuries that you saw from quadcopters. These were gunshots to children, in the head and in the chest primarily. How important is this documentation, considering the fact that Israel will not allow international journalists inside of Gaza?
It's incredibly important. I think it's almost like a sense of denial when you're there and you're realizing what's happening there. It's almost like you don't want to believe it. You don't want to believe that this is a child that just came in with a gunshot wound. Gunshot wounds are not foreign to me, and they're not to most of those healthcare workers that were in Gaza at the time. We've all seen gunshot wounds. I was trained in Chicago. I worked in Chicago. I've seen them. I know what it looks like. And when I was seeing this, I couldn't believe that I had dozens of children that I was seeing with these single wounds. So when we were in Gaza, we do something called a fast exam in the emergency department. It's an ultrasound exam. It's a very quick exam that you do to assess if someone has injuries elsewhere in their body. So for internal bleeding and whatnot. So things you would find when someone gets hit with a bomb, for example, or explosion or shrapnel. And almost all of these children that I documented, I did a fast exam, or Dr. Helen was doing a fast exam with me to see if they had any other injuries. And they would arrive dead. So that means all of them can't go to CT scan, right? Because they're arriving dead. And you had seconds, you had minutes before they were taken away to the morgue to make space for more patients coming in. And so we would do a quick assessment, and none of them had any other injuries except that single wound. And sometimes it was a through and through, like it would go in and come out, or it was retained bullets. And the 3 photos that I shared in the New York Times, all 3 of those children did survive. One of them was severely disabled. She had one in her neck. She was, I think, a 12 or 14-year-old little girl who was paralyzed from the neck down because of this single gunshot wound to her neck. So this was not just a couple of one-offs. This was in August, every single day I saw it. And there were many that went undocumented because of the nature of treating and the urgency of it. I couldn't document everything. But when I came back in December, I saw another child with a bullet in his abdomen, shot into his abdomen and retained in his abdomen. More children in the head. So it wasn't one hospital in 1 month. It was a different time, a different hospital. And it wasn't, if it was just me, it would make sense. Okay, you're the one who's, whatever, propaganda. We're talking about dozens and dozens of foreign doctors. We don't know each other. We're from different parts of the world and different specialties. And we all saw the same thing.
And watching that documentary, it was incredibly frustrating to see you go from congressman to congressman with your x-rays, with firsthand testimony. You held this child's head in your hands. I mean, you were there to testify. And they were so dismissive. And some didn't even question whether it was real, whether the bullet was real. At some point, did you just lose all hope taking this political route, knocking on congressmen's doors, just seeing them so incredibly dismissive?
Yeah, I think, I can say now, and when I look back, is I was extremely naive because I thought, for sure, I'm going to document this and I'm going to take it to my government and say, look, these are kids being shot. We have to stop arming Israel. And I thought that was going to be the response, we have to take this seriously. I mean, very naive. But it was very frustrating. I had this sense of just futility, what's the point? And there were some, and it's important to note at that time, I never personally met with any senior members. It was all interns and staff members. But, they listened, as it's their job to just listen. But, a lot of them kind of just shook their heads or, yeah, our hands are tied, that kind of thing, or blame it on the other administration, and then that administration blames it on this administration, so that kind of stuff. But there was never anything solid that we got. It was a very frustrating experience, but I know that it's planting seeds. And my job is to share the information that I gathered. That's what we do, right? And so that's not going to stop me. I will keep going.
And as you were walking through these hallways, did you see many Israeli flags?
Yes, in fact, many of the states had, Israeli flags outside, which I was actually, I don't know why I was surprised, but I was a little surprised to see a foreign nation's flag in our government's office. Was a little odd to me.
So the silence of the medical community, let's talk a little bit about that. Coming from a profession dedicated to preserving life, have you been surprised or disappointed by the response or lack of response, I should say, from parts of the international medical community when it comes to Gaza, when it comes to this genocide?
I will talk about my own country and the organizations, the professional organizations in the U.S. They have been nothing but silent. And they have specifically told us when we approach them, our professional colleges, that we don't want it to be too political. We don't want to get involved in politics. But I do know that many of these organizations have made statements about the Ukraine. And so it kind of leads you to believe that this is a double standard. This is hypocrisy. I remember, many organizations talking about when Russia bombed a maternity hospital in Ukraine, it was global outrage. I mean, everyone talked about it. There were professional organizations saying that healthcare workers can't be targeted. It's against humanitarian law. But in Gaza, you can do it every day. You can do it all the time. Nobody cares. Nobody's going to say anything about it. And I know that many organizations have been approached multiple times by us, the group of doctors that are from the U.S. at least for sure. But it's not really been something that's satisfying or that I've been content or any of us have been content with. So it is a double standard, but also just personally as a physician that took an oath and that is supposed to be for humanitarian causes is, as a physician, you are a humanitarian, or you should be, specifically the protected class of children. And as physicians, we see and we test, we see evidence, and then we recommend. That's what we do as our job, right? We see things and then we diagnose, and then we make treatment plan and recommendations. This is exactly the same thing. People expect doctors to be, neutral. Just show us the facts. Don't say anything else. Don't be political. But that would be unethical. If I see a child shot in the head, and I see it every day, and I'm seeing it multiple times, I'm not going to just say, here's the evidence. I'm going to say, here's the evidence, stop doing it. And I will name the perpetrator who is doing it. That doesn't make it political. That just makes it right. But that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to see, and when we see something that's clearly violating international law, but also violating human rights on a very basic level, if you don't speak up for that, you might as well quit your job. That's how I see it. I'm no good. I'm a hypocrite if I don't speak up. And that's why I don't understand how doctors, healthcare workers are seeing this. It's been years now, and they have absolutely nothing to say about it.
Yeah, if we can't stand up for children, then we don't stand for much. But apart from being a physician, you're a mother. And I think that plays a part too. You are a protector. And I believe one of the stats on the BBC, there was an article that said that 70% of all civilians killed in Gaza were women and children. How frustrating was it to have to deal with this non-evacuation process? I can't even call it an evacuation process. Here in Vienna, so many children from Ukraine were allowed to evacuate to receive medical treatment. We haven't received one child from Gaza. We haven't received one child from Gaza. Is it because their skin is brown? What is that process like?
Yeah, about the statistic, when I was in Gaza in August, so we had to keep track of our patients, like in terms of age and gender and condition and things. And most of my patients, about 86%, were women and children. And as far as the evacuation process goes, it is extremely difficult. It's not like a patient needs something and you find a country and everyone's, kind and accepts it, and sponsors them and everything. It is an extremely bureaucratic process and very difficult on every level. So a child gets injured or needs something, even if they're not injured, they need medical care. WHO has to approve that process, but first you have to get a letter from the Ministry of Health that they don't have any care here that they can receive, so they must go abroad. Then you have to, get approved by WHO. WHO will allow you to leave if you have a sponsoring country who's willing to pay for the treatment. But then you also have to have a sponsoring organization, an NGO, that is willing to do the logistics of taking the child out. So it's so many layers. By the time some of these patients also die by the time that process gets approved, or even if they do. But also there are medical corridors that existed before 2023 within the Palestinian territories. And that's actually the most important point here is West Bank and East Jerusalem are, for the most part, they're better equipped than Gaza, and they're willing to take patients. Now that healthcare system is also since then deteriorated quite a bit because of Israeli authorities, but they are still much better off than Gaza. But what better than to send patients from Palestine to another Palestinian territory, which is a lot closer, so critical patients can get there without, within safety. It's a lot more cost effective. And then that also allows them to return back to their families in Gaza when they want to, when they can. But the Israeli authorities have prevented that. They have blocked that medical corridor. And there have been advocacy agencies, like organizations, begging, please open this corridor up. Before 2023, 1,500 patients a month used to go and get care and come back safely. And since then, it's been, I don't even think, as of recent, it's been any. So another layer of hell that people experience is, okay, so they're already going through this genocide and killing, but now you ask a mother, imagine you're a mother of 4 children, and you're being told you can't take the rest of your 3 children with you. You can only evacuate with that 1 child to go get medical care in a country you've never been to, you don't speak the language, and you can't return, and you can't take your children with you. You have no right to return. I have no idea how I wouldn't be able to do. I don't know. I don't know what I would do. I mean, it would be another layer of hell. Yeah. So it's, and NGOs are limited too, because they can't, it's very hard for them to evacuate entire families. But how can you ask a mother to leave behind, in some of these cases, a breastfeeding infant, so that you can go with this 1 child to get medical care for an unknown amount of time, leaving your other children in a war zone? It's something that I can't even imagine what it feels like. So I could never ask a mother to do that.
I mean, the evil really has no ceiling. It's quite depraved.
Absolutely. And fathers aren't allowed to accompany their sick child abroad. They're not allowed to leave. So it only leaves mother as the caregiver or the primary caregiver. I mean, and that is a very common thing in Gaza right now. There's 20,000 patients waiting, probably more now because of the blockade. And most of them are children. And that's the conditions. Those are the conditions for a lot of them.
So not only are children not allowed to evacuate, but doctors really aren't allowed to enter either. You attempted re-entry, you were denied. I have a feeling it's because you were so vocal, but can you talk to me about what reason were you given by the Israeli military?
Yes, last year I tried to go back in August 2025. I was supposed to enter. I was in Jordan the night before I was supposed to enter into Gaza. And I was told just hours before, like, nope, you're not allowed in. No reasons given at that time. So I had to fly back. Since that time, I appealed along with several other doctors that were denied. We appealed. We got no response. It was escalated to the higher court, or the Supreme Court of Israel. And after months of waiting, we finally got an answer. And in that, the letter that was sent is 3 of us out of the several that applied, 3 of us were deemed a security risk for the country of Israel. But there's no reason as to the specifics of why we are a security risk. And when we spoke to our attorneys, it's like, well, the 3 of you have something in common. You've criticized Israel publicly. You have spoken out quite a bit, and you've criticized them publicly, and that's all we can think of. But why? I'm a mom of 3 children. I'm a doctor. I was given security clearance 2 times before. Why am I suddenly a security risk? So it leaves you to speculate and think. And is the threat because we spoke out and we showed the world what's happening in Gaza and what the Israeli authorities are doing to people in Gaza, specifically children? It kind of begs the question.
Yeah, when you were denied re-entry, this makes me think of the heartbreaking voice note that you received from the Palestinian medical student that you mentioned earlier, Helen. Talk to me a little bit about Helen, your relationship with Helen when you were in Gaza. I believe you also told me that you guys were living together during your stay there, and she was so heartbroken when she found out that you couldn't return.
Yeah, Dr. Helen, she's now graduated medical school, and I'm very proud of her. But she was someone I met when I was at Nasser for the first medical mission. She was my translator. She said, I'll be your translator, you can be my mentor. And it was a very tough experience at that time because of the things I was seeing, and it was my first time there. And she gave me strength to keep going. Ironically, she is the one who encouraged me, do what you know best, do emergency medicine, just do what you think is right when you think it's right. I know it seems futile, but just keep doing it. She was there every minute next to me, talking to the families with me, translating everything, which is incredibly important when you're trying to document. But the healthcare workers there, when they're on call, they're living in the hospital. And so when we were on call, they were on call. We were living in the same space, essentially. We're both vegetarians, so we were both sharing our food. I was sharing everything I got, I'd share with her. I learned so much about her family and her experience and all of the things that she'd gone through and her family was going through. And we just ended up having a very close relationship like sisters, and we were inseparable. Even the people there were, when they would see me without Helen, they were, where's Helen? Or they'd see Helen and where's Mimi, But the beautiful thing is we never lost contact with each other, and we speak to this day every day. But when I went back in December, she also came to Nasser again when I was there, and then came to Al-Aqsa. And that bond was even more strengthened. And since then, she's graduated and has been accepted to a university in Mexico City. And I'm trying to help her continue her education and raise funds for her to evacuate. But she's also co-authored a book with me called The Blood on My Hands. And I'm very excited about it because it includes the encounters that we had together, but also her diary entries and her voice notes and things that she has sent to me over the years. I think it's powerful, and I'm really glad that I was able to represent her voice in it.
That's so beautiful. And speaking of Mexico, you also were able to evacuate little Mira and her mother, Isra. Tell me a little bit about how she's doing.
Yeah, Mira is a little fireball. She's very strong. She's a warrior. She's a little girl, of course, with a CT scan with a bullet lodged in her head. That was printed in the New York Times. But she was also shot by a quadcopter. But her mother also sustained an amputation and needed medical care. And she has two sisters who are also very young. And they were evacuated to Mexico City. And of course, with the help of many, many people that are great human beings that showed up to help her and helped me with facilitating. But the sponsoring organization was Heal Palestine. And that was the first time that children have been evacuated to Mexico, which is very exciting. Since then, they have both received surgery, and we are trying to raise funds to rebuild their lives afterwards. So it's still very difficult. I got to know them more as I was there in Mexico City and spending more time with them over the past few months. But the psychological trauma that Mira and her sisters exhibit, it is just profound. They still hide under tables when they hear a loud sound. They had never heard thunder before. And the first night they were there, they were frantically sending messages, on, Dr. Mimi, what's the sound? What is this? What is this, bombs? Are these bombs? Like, should we go somewhere? What's happening, And it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking to hear them ask that. But also if they hear like a helicopter overhead or something, they're going for cover. Their mom, Isra, is just absolutely traumatized. She doesn't sleep. She's scared to sleep because they've been conditioned that, they have to get displaced again, or there will be an attack again at night. And so it's going to be a long process of healing, but that's just one family of thousands. And I can't imagine those that are still in Gaza, what they're going through, because it doesn't end just when you leave Gaza. Even if they happen to leave Gaza, it doesn't end. It continues.
And I'm sure for you, it also hasn't ended. All the emotional turmoil that you must feel as someone who witnessed the harrowing human cost of this genocide up close. How has that changed you as a physician and also as a person?
Yeah, it is. It's something that I think anybody who is a normal human being, you can't go to a place like Gaza and not be changed forever. You know, I was talking yesterday to the crowd at the film screening, and my husband said to me many times, you know, like, we have to mourn the old Mimi, like that there's no longer the old Mimi. And, you know, there's good and bad about that, but it's just, you're a different person. Like, your very existence has changed. Your perspective on everything has changed. And yeah, I mean, I think moving on, there's no moving on. And this term of PTSD, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder, it's really not applicable here because there is no post. You're still undergoing it. And I'm not talking about myself specifically, but I'm saying even the people that are in Gaza or leave Gaza, this is not post. It still continues. You can't call it post-traumatic stress disorder because it is happening right now and you're still experiencing it. So it's a different term, it's a different condition. And you can't treat it like PTSD because it's just not the same thing. So, you know, in terms of healing and accepting, you just, personally, I can speak for myself, I just keep going and advocate as much as I possibly can in every way to expose what I saw, to stop it. But I think that's about the very least that I can do, considering I'm an American.
And despite everything Palestinians have endured and you yourself witnessed, many Palestinians continue to demonstrate an incredible amount of resilience, of generosity, and of joy. They've taught us joy as resistance. What moments of humanity, hope, or resistance stood out to you during your time in Gaza? What lessons do you take away from the people you met and the time you spent there?
There are so many examples I can give you, and I could sit here for hours talking about them. There are a couple that I have talked about in public, and you know, when we go to Gaza as foreign physicians or healthcare workers, we wear a vest that represents our NGO, but the American ones have an American flag on it, a big American flag on it, on the back and in the front. And when I went there for the first time, I was terrified because I said, why would I walk around with an American flag? People are going to, you know, hit me with stones and stuff. But I remember sitting on the driveway of Nasser Hospital, where the entrance is, with Helen, and random people stopped me, family members, patients, and said, "Thank you for being here. We know you don't represent your country. We know, or your government. We know you don't represent your government, but you left your safety and your family to be here with us, to sit here in solidarity with us, and it gives us hope that it's not over for us." And that just, to me, was like the most profound thing that I just didn't expect. If it were me, I'd probably be very angry, and I'm not sure what I would say or do, but you know, they still have humanity preserved in them when humanity actually went there to die. I mean, that's what you think, right? But they have it preserved in them, the kindness, and they don't forget that, no matter how badly things have happened for them and their families. They're still there. They have manners. They have kindness and love and acceptance in their heart, no matter who you are. They will share every piece of food, coffee, drinks, whatever they have, even if it's a drop, they will share it with you first. You know, I used to joke with Helen. She used to make about the best coffee I've ever tasted in my life. I said, "Helen, you are the best barista in the world." And she'd make this coffee that was just so thick and strong with cardamom. And I'm telling you, every day that she brought it, I would look forward to it. But I knew how much love she put into it and how much pride she had, you know, giving it to me. And but it was just things like that, and I'll just never forget, and I'll cherish forever.
I think this documentary is so incredibly important, truly, because you are our eyes and ears on the ground in Gaza. Israel has killed hundreds of journalists. They won't allow independent journalists in. That's why documenting this has been so incredibly important. When I first remember screening the documentary, it was 2 years ago. We're still at the same place. Yeah. So many people have senselessly lost their life. But how have things changed? Do you feel the climate is changing as far as like people are waking up to the reality and to the truth? And what change do you even see in the room after people view the documentary? It's very short, it's only 25 minutes, but it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, it's hard to say, right? I think in the U.S., I feel like the political climate has changed a little. The favor for Israel has gone down quite a bit. Historic numbers. I mean, it's never been like this before. But when you look at Gaza, it's very hard to think that there's been change. It's unimaginable that after so long, this is continuing, and we're still talking about mass starvation. We're still talking about medications being blocked or fuel being denied entry. I never thought that I would be here in 2026 today and still talking about the same things of water not being available. I mean, I'm honestly, I am shocked to a certain extent. But I feel like in the past, maybe 2 years ago, it wasn't popular to say that, oh, let's stop arming Israel. But I think that has fallen out of favor. I think that supporting Israel is no longer, cool and mainstream. I think people are waking up, especially in like the celebrity world. And there's no more tolerance for it, to say that we should continue killing children. And these are there's no, they're kind of slam dunk statements. There's nothing to talk about. After saying that you shouldn't kill children, you shouldn't shoot children in the head or the neck, or starve children or babies, or deny them medical care. Those are just no-brainer statements. And I challenge anyone to argue that. Like, how could you support that? And say it to me in public and say it out loud, because you're gonna look like you're the demon, And so I think it's become so obvious now that it's even easier for people to talk about it. So, of course, I like to think that, and I do hope that it changes things in Gaza for the people of Gaza. But, I can't say with any amount of confidence that it's going to happen in my lifetime. I don't know.
And what's next for Dr. Mimi? You're still obviously a practicing physician, but you just came from Geneva. What other plans are in the works for you?
Well, I have, a book that I've co-authored with Dr. Helen, of course. I've written some articles just yesterday or day before yesterday. Costs of War, Brown University has published our report. That's an in-depth analysis and ballistics report about the children that were shot by quadcopters. And it's firsthand evidence, forensic analysis that is actually kind of first of its kind to be published. And I hope that it gets a lot more awareness and the sharing of that article. But I will continue to do all of those things. That's not going to stop me. But hopefully we see change, and I will continue to work to get Helen her continuing education and get Mira and her family, get their lives rebuilt and continue to see them and do as much as I can.
Dr. Mimi, can you talk to us about the conditions of those on the ground in Gaza when we're talking about treating children inside of a hospital where you have no equipment, even if you do save a life, only to leave the hospital and then have them encounter really mass starvation from the deliberate block of the humanitarian corridor?
Yeah, the starvation in Gaza was apparent years ago. It was before the IPC declared stage 5 famine. I mean, we were all screaming it like this is headed towards famine. Nothing was done about it. Basic nutrients were still blocked from entering. But I recall being in Gaza in December and seeing patients come back, children come back with post-operative dehiscence or opening of the wounds because they just hadn't healed, like months after. And the wounds looked fresh. And, my colleagues and I we're all just, what is going on? When did you sustain these injuries? It's like, months ago. And it's because of the lack of protein in the market. But we're talking about an already starving population. So they were already malnourished from even before, it's been almost 2 decades that this has been happening. So it's a chronically malnourished population. And now you put on it acute malnourishment. And that's a recipe for death, right? That's the easiest way to kill off an entire population is to starve them to death. We were seeing children coming in with, wasting in the temples, sunken under eyes. And if you had any pre-existing condition, for example, a baby that was born to a mom who gave birth preterm, because of the stress around her, the lack of nutrients, the bomb residue. So many moms who couldn't breathe and didn't have enough oxygen in their blood would have preterm labor. And they would have a baby that required special feeding. They couldn't breastfeed them because they were malnourished themselves, the mothers. They needed special formula, which wasn't available. Even regular formula is too expensive. They couldn't afford it. So I met mothers who knew nothing else but to feed their baby sugar water, which will kill an infant, right? But what else do you do? What else could you possibly give an infant? And those were the conditions that they were forced to be in. But in Al-Aqsa, when I worked there in December, I had the opportunity to talk to the mothers and talk to them about conditions beyond just trauma. And I met babies who had conditions like spina bifida. I remember a mom bringing in a baby who was about 2 months old and said, the baby's not moving her legs. She hadn't moved her legs since she was born. And I asked her, she never got prenatal care because the ultrasounds have been destroyed. There's no prenatal vitamins or routine blood tests that they can get. And something as simple as folic acid, which is available in fortified foods everywhere, or in the prenatal vitamins, was unavailable. And so this mom had given birth to a baby with spina bifida. She had a very tiny hole in the back of her, the lower back. And this baby is most likely never going to walk. And all could have been avoided if she had access to basic nutrients. So there's tons of examples that I can give you of that, but the majority of the population, especially the children, and when you think about children in development, children need to have a certain amount of nutrient and type of nutrient available. What's available in Gaza and what Israeli authorities allow in is junk food, chips, ramen noodles, processed cheeses. That's what I saw firsthand. That's what we saw. That's what we were eating too. But these people have been eating it for a very long time. And even that is, I think, taken away now and blocked.
Yeah, it's clearly the deliberate and systematic destruction of the entire fabric of life on the ground. And I know you spoke quite openly about smuggling in equipment, medical equipment, to be able to do your job as a physician. And that was met with reprimand by the IOF. You also tried to smuggle in food? The second time or the third time when I got denied entry, I had baby formula, a ton of baby formula in my entire half of the suitcase, but I wasn't allowed to enter. My first and second mission, I also brought food, packets of tuna or protein to give. I was actually pretty lucky in that I was not searched. But the colleagues that were with me, I remember one of my colleagues from another country who had everything taken out of her bag. Every little item was taken out and placed on a table. And there were things like coffee. She had things like coffee, a little pot and things like that. And they asked her questions about everything. They asked her questions about the food. And when they saw they were food items, what did the IOF?
They had kept her and talked to her about why she's bringing all of these things in. And they have the authority to take anything from you. In fact, they can even deny you entry. They can deny your entire convoy entry. So that's why we're kind of, told before we leave is don't try to take anything in. Don't try to sneak anything in, especially money. Money is one of those pain points. The first time we were allowed to take $2,800 cash, US cash, which doesn't take you very far. But the second time was $280. We couldn't take more than that in with us because they didn't want us to give it to anybody. That was there, that was local, that could use it to buy flour or anything in the market. And if you tried to, you could get denied and your entire convoy could be jeopardized, which of course no one wants that on their conscience, that entire, so we're kind of scared into not taking anything.
And if you say the food is for you.
Yeah, if it's deemed too much by them, so if it's more than they think that you would eat in that 2-week amount of time or whatever, then they can take it away from you.
And were you explicitly told that you're not allowed to share your food?
No, we were just told that you cannot take items with you to share. That's generally speaking. So you can only take one phone, you can take one laptop, things only for yourself. If there's medications, they have to be on your name. I mean, it like has to say prescription bottle with your name on it. And it's very arbitrary. Like they can stop you for anything and take anything they want from you. And I use this, example that I saw a doctor, I believe he was from Canada, talking about his stethoscope. I was so shocked to hear him talk about this, but he said they stopped him and took his stethoscope from him because they said, you're not going to use the stethoscope for your own heart. You're going to listen to other people's heart. So you can't take it. It's not a personal item.
Right, that's the point. That's why physicians are going into Gaza.
Yeah, but that's what they do ask us, like, why are you trying to save these people? Why are you going in? They do harass us and intimidate us. I remember one of them, giving us the middle finger when we were at one of the checkpoints, pointing guns at us. So it's definitely not like a friendly environment when you're going through these checkpoints. You're definitely not treated as a humanitarian worker.
Were there any times where you felt like your own life was at risk?
Yeah, there is actually no safety. And no one is protected. The least amount of protection that you can actually receive is if you are a foreign healthcare worker, which actually protects the people in the hospital because that's where we're present. But they bombed a hospital when foreign doctors were there, last year. They've done it before. They used to shoot at the hospital, and the quadcopters would shoot at the hospital when we were on the balcony or somewhere like. So there was never any sense of safety or protection. You could be walking in a market and you can get killed. So in Gaza Strip is too small. Like I said before, if they decide they want to airstrike next to the hospital, you absolutely can get killed. There was a day I was in the emergency department and treating patients when a mass casualty incident came in. And I was doing a procedure that's very sensitive and critical, removing blood from around the patient's heart, and had a very large needle inserted in a teenager's chest to remove blood. And you can pierce the heart with a needle if you're not careful. But I remember at that moment, the entire hospital shook, the window shuddered, and my hand actually moved because of a bomb that was so close. It was on the grounds just right outside the gate of the hospital. They had struck a car. And in that moment, we received another mass casualty incident. So you could have literally been standing at that gate at the hospital and you would have been killed.
And in these procedures, there's absolutely no way to sanitize the room.
There's actually, and I talked about this before, there's flies everywhere. Everywhere there's flies. There's flies within the wounds of the patients in the OR. I remember seeing mold and maggots inside of the respiratory equipment. The ambu bag that we use is used over and over again. I couldn't believe when I saw mold inside of one of them, and I asked about it, and they said, we can't change it out because we don't have any more. Like, we don't get this. And those are single-use items, so meaning if I use it for one patient, I have to throw it away entirely and use another. And the same goes for the laryngoscopes that I brought in. Those are single-use items that are supposed to be thrown away between patients. I use those dozens of times. I wiped them on my clothes and reused them. There was no hand soap when I went. You'd have to bring your own soap. There was times the sink isn't working in the trauma bay, and gloves were basically non-existent at that time in August. I routinely remember wearing one glove for an entire mass casualty incident. And you were drenched in blood. You'd have blood on your arms. I mean, this is just not necessary.
And how much of a shock is it returning to the United States, to your work in this fully functioning hospital? I mean, were there times where you felt paralyzed thinking back to the conditions that you were forced to work in?
Yeah, it does. It leaves you with a sense of anger, quite a bit of anger. That why is this population being subjected to this torture when it's not necessary? Why do I get to be here in safety, in the warmth of my home, and have food, and my children are safe? I don't have to worry when I sleep that someone's going to drop a bomb on my home, or drop a bomb in the hospital, my place of work. So it leaves you with a sense of resentment, but it also, makes you want to work harder to stop it. I believe in, my patients receiving the best care. I believe in providing what I absolutely can for my patients, no matter what country I'm in. And so it shouldn't exclude you from it just because you're in Palestine. And that's something that's just, it's very hard to accept that.
Basic human rights for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as far as you mentioned sleep, you said you were living with Helen. What was that like during your 2 medical missions in Gaza? Where did you guys stay on hospital grounds?
Yeah, everyone who works in the hospital is on call. So for the trauma department, you would sleep in the hospital. And there were times where, we would be working all night. There were mass casualty incidents coming in. But there were lulls here and there. And that's how we really, I got to know Helen and her story. There's a small balcony up next to the OR at Nasser Hospital, and we would overlook the city, what used to be of the city. And she would tell me all of the stories of what got bombed where. And, Helen actually was in both hospitals during the time that it was under siege. So she was at Shifa Hospital originally when it was under siege and is taken over by the soldiers. And again, at Nasser Hospital. And both of those stories that she shared with me are in the book, The Blood on My Hands. But it's just harrowing. The things that she told me, she recalls hiding in a spot and hearing the soldiers outside and being terrified. Like, is she going to be able to tell her mother and her sisters goodbye? Are they going to know that is she safe? Just things that, the 23-year-old woman should not ever have to think about, just a student. And, she, and that's how I kind of got to know her story, and we would spend time together. But I learned a lot from her in those times.
And you heard drones all the time.
Yeah, the drones are 24/7. They're ever present. So there are drones, different types of drones. There are drones that have the capability of shooting, of course, like the ones that shot Mira, and that shoot children. There are ones that can drop bombs as well, airstrikes and things like that, and cluster bombs. But there are also surveillance drones. So those drones are always present. They're constantly going around, and sometimes there's 2 or 3 of them. They also have surveillance planes, like the small planes. So they don't stop. They're just all the time because they're watching. They get closer. They can go farther. They can come. I remember peeing by a window in the hospital, and it just would come closer and go back closer, and it's terrifying. You don't know what the next thing is going to be. You don't know if it's going to now send another one to target where you're sitting or where the patients are sitting, and so it's a very scary feeling.
It's so dystopian to think that these machines, they're killer machines. They are, and the amount of countries complicit in this genocide that supply this warfare. Like, what would the IOF be without these killer drones? They stay in their tanks, comfortably in their tanks. They stay far away, just managing the drones. But without all of these killer drones and disgusting warfare, like machinery, this is what makes the killing of children so, because they talk about precision. Where's the precision when a bullet enters a child's head?
Well, that is the precision, right?
Exactly,
that's intentional. And there's actually soldiers that talk about it on some of these interviews that have been coming out, but they talk about it like a video game. Like, you can be somewhere else and you can push a button and it can shoot somebody. And they know exactly who they're shooting. They know the target. So this technology is very much present, and it is a testing ground. Gaza is a testing ground for military technology. That's actually something very important, that some of the things that, a lot of the people, this is fabricated, this technology doesn't exist, it's impossible. How can a quadcopter shoot like a sniper? Absolutely it can. And that technology is absolutely available. The artificial intelligence that's being used to identify targets is also, one of the first used in Gaza. And so, it also takes the accountability factor out of it when you can be remote
Right.
And you don't have to be looking in a scope at the child. You can just do it like a video game, as if it's this, some alternate universe. And there's nobody keeping anybody accountable.
Full impunity to kill.
Yeah.
Dr. Mimi, thank you so much for everything you've done, for everything you do, and everything you are. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.